Hey everyone, it's Marvin. Thanks so much for listening to Books and Boba. I just wanted to take a quick second to remind you that Books and Boba just launched our Patreon to help support our future endeavors. Rira and I have been running Books and Boba for the last 6.5 years, and we've always talked about wanting to do more, including expanding our content offerings, being able to go to book events and do more coverage. And so to help us get closer to those ambitions, we started a Patreon to help us grow and to better support books by Asian and Asian American authors. We are offering 2 tiers for our Patreon. The first is our regular Boba member coming in at $3 a month, which will give you access to our brand new Books and Boba Discord server, so you can engage with your fellow Books and Boba Club members and also Rira and myself in real time. This is where we'll be aiming to move the bulk of our book club discussions, but rest assured we'll still have a presence on Goodreads as well. And our premium tier is our Honey Boba member tier, coming in at $5 a month, where in addition to access to our Discord server, you'll also get access to our monthly Boba Chats, a bonus podcast where Rira and I and some guests will get together each month and have a more casual discussion on stuff that may or may not be book related, as well as answer some listener Q&A. Honey Boba members will also have access to a poll to help decide an official Books and Boba book pick once per quarter. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, support Books and Boba on Patreon by going to patreon.com/booksandboba. As always, Rira and I really appreciate your support. All right, thanks for listening, and I'm on with the show. This episode of Books and Boba is brought to you by First Republic Bank. The world is changing, and your needs are evolving. As your focus turns to what matters most to you and your community, First Republic remains committed to offering personalized financial solutions that fit your needs. From day one, you'll be connected with a dedicated banker who will serve as your primary point of contact throughout your relationship with the bank. They'll be there to listen to you, understand your values, and meet you on your financial journey. Your banker can offer solutions that support your goals at any stage, from setting up a personal checking account to refinancing household debt to buying a first home. As your needs evolve, you can call or email your banker at any time for the support you need. Because First Republic believes what matters to you matters most. Learn more at firstrepublic.com. That's firstrepublic.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And welcome to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And we are here today with a author interview with Chloe Gong, the author of the upcoming novel These Violent Delights, which is a fantasy retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai, a time period filled with gangsters, political unrest, and also monsters. Yeah, Rira, you and I both read this arc before talking to Chloe. What are your thoughts about it?
Because this is like based on Romeo and Juliet, obviously I went in with some expectations, some tropes in mind, and I think Chloe did a really good job adapting the story and making the characters her own. And the fight scenes are really fantastic in this book. I really enjoyed it overall. So,
fight scenes are something that, especially in like Shakespearean plays, maybe this is just me, but they never really translated well in my brain. But the way that Chloe wrote it in her book is so vivid. It's really awesome. I really enjoyed this book as well. Longtime listeners of the podcast should know that this setting is one of my favorite settings in all of fiction. It's one that I wish was appeared more often in Western literature. But it's kind of like, this is the gangland, like Prohibition era Chicago of Chinese fiction. And I really, really enjoyed the story. Chloe was a great interview. We had a really great conversation about her inspirations, writing the book, her experiences adapting Romeo and Juliet, and also her background as one of the newest members of this emerging trend of like super young, talented published authors that are emerging from the Asian diaspora.
So here's our interview with Chloe Gong, and I hope you guys enjoy.
Hey everyone, we're here with Chloe Gong, the author of the upcoming book, These Violent Delights on Books and Boba. Welcome to the show, Chloe.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, right off the bat, I want to say that I am just in awe of your accomplishments and congratulations on publishing your first book while still in college. I feel like
Thank you.
there's this new generation of just amazing authors who are just doing it.
Gen Z authors really killing it in the YA genre.
Yeah. I know I'm pumping you up right now, but how does it feel to be this accomplished at this early in life?
Oh my
Because
God.
I would really like to know.
Well, first of all, you can't see me, but now I'm blushing because wow, that's so kind. I don't know. I don't think of myself as like particular, like not to downplay myself, but it's very much like it's just this thing that I've always wanted to do, and it's almost just something that like it's like unthinkable to me to even like not be writing. So just to be published now is just kind of this like step that I've like it naturally has just seemed like something I'm like pursuing. So it's when people are like, "Oh my God, like how are you like in college and publishing?" I'm like, I can't even imagine not like always writing. So publishing just seems like the natural thing that I'm doing now.
I have to say, because you're majoring in English, right?
Mhm.
At University of Pennsylvania. You're one of the very few authors that I've talked to who actually studied English in college. I feel like most people that we've interviewed on the show, they've worked in finance, they went to law school, and then they found like they've suppressed that writing dream until, you know, they couldn't hold it in anymore.
Well,
so
I mean,
I find it pretty
because we're
amazing
Asian.
that you just
Yeah,
like
I mean-
kept it up.
There's context there, right? Because this is a podcast for Asian American authors. And for at least for those from our generation, Rira and my generation, that was a dream that we stereotypically maybe had to keep suppressed, right?
Yeah, like so I'm a double major with English and international relations. So even though like my parents have been very supportive in saying like, "Oh yeah, like English is a great major." Anytime they're reporting to my relatives what I study in college, it's, "Oh yeah, she studies international relations. She's gonna get a job in international relations." It's like English just goes out the window. And I'm like, "Okay, you know what? It's fine. We can ignore it if we want for now. I'll keep doing my thing in school."
I mean, well, now you're an author, and that's an actual occupation.
Yeah, you've made money writing, so
Yeah,
it's real now.
that's the validation to the Asian relatives making money.
So, how did you get started in writing? I'm guessing that you started writing at a very young age, since you're still young yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I started very early. I started the at the end of my first year of high school, I started writing honestly mostly as just like a hobby. Like I didn't think of it as this like big thing to pursue. It was very much just like I was bored, I had nothing better to do. I was babysitting my sister a lot because my sister is 12 years younger than me. So at the start of high school, I was always like sitting with her as she took naps, and like I had nothing better to do because I couldn't make any noise. And I was like, "Oh, I've run out of books to read, so why don't I just write my own?" So that was just kind of how like it honestly just started from there. Like all throughout high school, I was always just writing like something random. Like I didn't think of it as like writing a book. I was just thinking of it as like telling myself stories. So like throughout all that, like I was just practicing a lot, I guess. And so by the time I like got to college, I was like, wow, maybe I know how to write a book. Surprising.
Well, what kind of stories did you used to write? Because These Violent Delights is a pretty cool. I mean, and we'll talk about the book a little bit later, but it's a really cool mashup of a lot of genres and a lot of different concepts. And you can tell that you have probably a wide range of interests in a lot of different types of stories. What kind of stories were you writing when you were getting started?
Yeah, I think it definitely, with These Violent Delights being a mishmash of genres, I think it definitely shows in the fact that like I used to write like everything and I consume everything. So I feel like the only thing that is like constant throughout everything I create was that they were YA, because like as like, I guess, a literal child writing. Like the only thing that I knew how to write were like teenagers my age or maybe like 1 or 2 years older. Cause like when I was writing like at 15, I was like reading books about like 17-year-olds. I was like, wow, 17-year-olds are so cool. I want to write about them too. So like that was really the only like constant theme. But like it was wild. I started out writing a so the first like technically manuscript that I wrote was a like YA paranormal. And it's really interesting because I can like trace all the stories I was writing with what was like currently like trendy on shelves. So like the first two books I wrote were paranormals because it was the age of Twilight, or like it was like the age right after Twilight got big. So it was like Fallen by Lauren Kay, like Hush Hush. A lot of those, like The Summoning by Kelly Armstrong, like a lot of those, like average girl discovers she has superpowers slash average girl like meets an immortal like man creature. I shouldn't say man. That's kind of creepy. Like an immortal love interest. Those kind of stories. And then after the YA paranormal age was dystopian. So I had a dystopian story like following that boom. And then we hit like the YA fantasy kind of like big burst as well. So I had like three YA high fantasies. So it was very much like I almost want to say These Violent Lights was the first book I actually wrote that I wasn't like highly influenced by like the market with, because it was the first book I was actually taking seriously. Whereas the previous ones, I was kind of just like telling myself stories and like going off of what other things I was really enjoying and like trying to make it my own.
That's amazing, though. So why don't you tell us a little bit about These Violent Delights?
Okay. These Violent Delights is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 1920s Shanghai. And it is about a 18-year-old girl who's the heir of the Scarlet Gang, who's one of the two most powerful gangs in Shanghai at this time. And she comes back into the city after spending 4 years in New York, where she was educated. And once she comes back, she realizes that there are some strange things happening in the city because there are these rumors of madness, like killing her gangsters. There's rumors of a monster that's terrorizing the city. And as more and more people start dying in her gang, she has to work with the heir of the rival gang, the White Flowers, who also happens to be her ex-boyfriend from 4 years ago. And they have to set their grudges aside and set their guns aside to work together and find out the truth about what is happening to their city before everyone dies, which would be really bad.
So, like you said, this book is inspired by Romeo and Juliet. And there have been so many adaptations of the play. I'm guessing that Romeo and Juliet is your favorite Shakespearean play because, this is your debut novel.
Yes. It's like, it's my favorite in the sense that I really like the language and the story. Like I really love what Shakespeare did with it. Like I think he really did something. But I would say that I can't really pick like a favorite Shakespeare in the sense of like, oh, this is just the one that I love the most. Because I think he was so versatile and that he was doing so many different things with his plays, if that made sense.
Yeah. I mean, I thought this was a really interesting take on the Romeo and Juliet tale because, typically Romeo and Juliet from the original text was about these two young lovers who fall in love at first sight and kind of make really rash decisions because they're in that high of like first love. But your story takes place after that, right? In a world where they didn't kill themselves after their first encounter and are actually like jaded ex-lovers who are now like cynical of the world. What was the inspiration to like take that route in this story of the star-crossed lovers?
I think it was that I've always read like Romeo and Juliet as this like commentary on like love and hate and like family in a sense, since like the blood feud is one of the like big things in the original play. So I think while a lot of other adaptations have gone like more the like love and what you do for it kind of angle, I also thought that there was this interesting part of it that like a lot of people have really ignored about like the hatred and the like the thin line between love and hate is sort of really what was going like what it was there. Literally just the other day, I saw this random tweet that was like real life Romeo and Juliet get married after Italian quarantine. And I was like, did you read Romeo and Juliet? Like, if they got married, that's not real life Romeo and Juliet. They didn't die, right? But like, not that they're gonna die at the end of this book. It's a retelling after all. Anyway, it's so like when I approached the story, I was like, I do want to take these elements of like fielding families and like the extent to which like hatred acts upon like people who don't really have a reason to hate each other, and then kind of go from there. Because then I pull in a lot of other things about like the foreigners and like people you actually have reason to hate. And I was like, this would be interesting to look at side by side.
Yeah. Did you have a lot of fun? Because I noticed a lot of nods to the original text in the story. I mean, there's still a masquerade ball. There's a nurse. There's a
Mercutio and Benvolio.
XP. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely had a lot of fun dropping Easter eggs because I mean, like, I'm an English major after all, and I was taking a Shakespeare class like as I was revising it. So it was like I had like, even though I'm trying to tell a good story first and foremost, I have all this like knowledge in me about like symbolism and like foreshadowing and all that. So I was like, I am gonna use my English degree. It is coming in here. But yeah, like all the places where I could like drop direct lines from the play, but then like reimagine it in a different context, or all the places where I could like give little nods to like motifs and symbols. It was just, I was living. Like, this is what an English major loves.
Yeah. When I first heard about your book, when we, I think we did an announcement when it was first announced on Publishers Weekly, but I was drawn into it because 1920s Shanghai is probably one of my favorite settings. It's one that's used a lot in like, Chinese dramas and like Chinese movies, but it's a really fascinating time because 1920s Shanghai is such an interesting place, right? It's a city that is lauded internationally as like this Pearl de Orient, right? This international city, but it's that way because of imperialism and like encroaching Western influence. It's such an interesting time because it's a setting that is, more palatable to Western sensibilities because there's a lot of, like people wearing suits and, organized crime and flappers and clubs. But it's also a time of like great historical significance in Chinese history. What made you want to set your story in this era of Shanghai?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because so all of my family, before my parents immigrated with me when I was 2, like they are from Shanghai, and then all of my family, like extended wise, they're still there, and they were all from Shanghai. So I grew up like hearing a lot about like the way that the city used to be, like not necessarily from my parents themselves, but they had a lot of interest in how it was as well. So they would be like, this is the culture, this was what like this everything that just comes from like just casual dinner table conversations, I guess, that I've like sort of picked up. So I've always known like vaguely about like how interesting like the 1920s and 30s in Shanghai was, but it wasn't until like I decided that I wanted to write something set in the Roaring Twenties and then also set in Shanghai that I really did research and then like actually discovered like the extent of it. So like while initially I was like, yeah, I want something with like the flappers aesthetic, something with like the gold and the glitter. And then I was like, well, I want to root it in like the culture that I came from, and I want to like really examine a lot of like things about identity. So that's like how it got mashed together. And then I actually did research and I was like, wow, like this was wild. Like the Western influence on it is like, it completely like makes the identity of the city back then. So it was just like to write a story set there, it did really seem perfect for what I was trying to do, like in terms of talking about like a girl who is really influenced by the West and now she's trying to grapple with like a return to the East, but also like all this commentary about like colonialism and imperialism, and like Shanghai just seemed like it like the city was literally embodying a lot of the things that I was trying to hit. So it was just this like perfect culmination of everything, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it came like really well together. Because like in the original Shakespeare play, it's set during a blood feud, and I think like because 1920 Shanghai, like you have colonialism and imperialism, you have all of these different ethnic groups, and they all want the slice, they all want a slice of the pie. So I think it was really like a perfect mashup from the original text and like the historical context of Shanghai at the time.
Yeah. I mean, so I also have family in Shanghai. My family, before we moved to Taiwan after the Civil War, is from Ningbo, which is,
Ooh.
a city pretty close to Shanghai.
Oh, my grandma's family's from there.
Oh yeah? Cool.
Yeah.
I've actually met a bunch of people from that area here in the States.
Wild.
It's crazy, yeah.
Oh.
But I've only visited China in, the last few decades. And, going there now, places like the Bund, which is still like, the big like financial center, and like places like the French Concession, they're kind of more touristy spots or commercial areas, but being able to explore it as it might have been back in the 20s through your book was really amazing, because you can see how like the reason there's Western architecture here was because people decided that, oh, this is now mine, and decided to take it from the Chinese. And this is right after the Opium Wars, where the whole country was kind of humiliated by like Western power, right? So it was really, as someone with ties to the city, to me it was a little moving to like be able to explore it from the perspective of Juliet, who, you write as, she's kind of like a third culture kid, right? She was born in Shanghai, but raised in New York. So in essence, she's almost Asian American too, or Asian diaspora, because she does have like a Western perspective on things and has to grapple with her identity everywhere, right? You write her as someone who can't fit in anywhere because she's in between cultures. Did you also base some of that on your own experiences?
I think so. I think when I set out to write Juliet, it was like, even though like she might not technically be like diaspora, like a lot of us are, like in the sense that she didn't immigrate out and she came back. It was definitely like that sort of narrative that I was trying to like draw her up with, because it's that sense where like she is too Chinese for the West, but too Western like for China. And I think like a lot of us are kind of like trapped in that like in between zone where it's like, well, I can't even be either of it properly, because it's like it's even worse for a lot of like actual immigrants, because it's like I can't even speak the mother language that well. Like at least Juliet knows all those languages really well.
Well, she speaks like what, like at least 10 languages, I feel like, in this book.
Yeah, which is actually like, that was wild, because people like the elite in the 20s really just learned so many languages like for the fun of it. And like as I was writing this book too, like I speak some of them. Like I speak French, I learned some like Russian as I was writing it. But then there were just some parts where I was like, I hope this is right, and if it's not, then we can pretend. But like that was completely a tangent. What was I talking about? Oh, right. Yeah, so like even though like maybe Juliet's not like a complete reflection of the diaspora experience, but I knew that my readers, like as a young adult book, I knew my readers were going to be like teenagers, and I really wanted to reach Asian teenagers who would like finally see themselves like reflected on shelves. Because like even now, like diversity in young adult literature is getting better, but it's still like Asian American narratives are nowhere near like white American narratives that get like the whole spectrum represented out there. So I was like, if I can reach a young Asian reader who is finally seeing like themselves and their feelings reflected in a character that they can like admire in the book, then that's something that I absolutely want to do.
Yeah. And I mean, Julia is such a badass character in this book. Because she's not only dealing with, the cultural stuff, but I mean, she's not only dealing with like the cultural stuff of being, a Western educated Chinese, but she's also dealing with, Chinese patriarchy, which is a huge thing, in our culture. And also the fact that she's a very capable fighter, right? Your action scenes in this book, there are quite a few, and they're all really well written and very like vivid. And, you really see her do like action girl stuff, which is really awesome. Was that something you had to, learn to write, or were you always, like, how did you approach the action scenes in this book?
Yeah. Did you watch Romeo Must Die or any like gangster films growing up that helped you write the action scenes?
Surprisingly, I haven't consumed as much like gangster media. I think a lot of it definitely comes from like previous like YA books that I've read, because like girl with sword is like a huge YA trope. Like the badass girl who like, uproots a kingdom, whatever, like leads the rebellion, all of that. But like, they're always white. So I was like, I mean, I'm gonna write Juliet and she's gonna be Chinese, but she's not gonna be like the usual like docile East Asian like girl that people put in their narratives when it's not written by like an actual member of the diaspora. I was like, she's gonna have the personality that other YA fantasy protagonists have been allowed to have this past decade, and she's also gonna be Chinese. So it was very much like I was gonna give YA what it needed. But I think that funnily enough, the few things I did watch was have you guys seen Captain America Winter Soldier?
Yeah.
The highway scene where was it Steve or Bucky who flips the knife? Either way, there's a really cool scene where they do a knife flip, and I watched it like 20 times to describe it right. And I think it ended up getting cut in the end. So that was, yeah.
I like the fact that you, even though Juliet is this badass character who, she can wield a pistol and fight, she was still very feminine. And she is very self-aware. She knows that her looks, she needs to keep up appearances, and she uses her socialite persona to get what she wants. And I thought that was like a really, I thought that was like really fitting, especially for the setting when, women, they don't have that many rights, even if they're elite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I definitely went into that like intentionally in trying to. It was like a commentary on the way like Eastern beauty standards work, but it was also like I didn't necessarily want to villainize it, because like we get enough of that in Western media, but it's also the sort of thing that like it was my responsibility as well to like comment on it and not just like brush it under the rug, because like there's a huge like colorism problem in like East Asia, Asian media at large as well. So I was like, this is something that I want to like pin down on, and it's something that Juliet knows and she's aware of, and like something that molds her personality in the sense that she knows that if she didn't look like this, if she didn't act the way that she does, she would not have the power that she does have. So it's like it was so interesting to build her character in the sense that she has this immense amount of privilege, and then she also doesn't, and seeing how that like goes.
I also liked her because she comes from New York at 15, and then she goes back, and then she returns when she's 18 years old. And when she first comes to Shanghai as a 15-year-old, she rejects everything that is like special about Shanghai. She's like, I'm only going to wear American dresses. Shanghai fashion is inferior. And then now that she's 18, she's like, okay, I've calmed down a bit. Like, like I don't really have this superiority complex about Western fashion being more superior or Western education being more superior. And I think that is, even though it's set in the 20s, I think it's a sentiment that a lot of Asian American Asian diasporans go through now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was something where it was like, it's this like internalized hatred that I feel like so many diaspora have to work through. Like, it's the sense that, like, oh, well, I don't have like an accent, so I'm better than the people who do. And then it's kind of like a lot of people still get stuck in that like mindset because they're so like they want so badly to be accepted in Western society, and they want to show like the rest of Western society that they are Western and they're not like those other like Asian people. And I mean, it's definitely like a toxic mindset that like a lot of people then work through, and they're like, well, actually, like I can accept the culture that I came from, and there are like good things about it, that I don't have to like submit myself to the Western perception of what like a good Asian person has to be. And that was definitely something that I gave Juliet also to work through, in the sense that when she comes back at first, she's like, oh, well, I'm not like any of these other people. Like, I can speak English now, I'm educated now. But it's like, it's like internalized colonialism. So it was something that was important to me to write in.
We talked a lot about Juliet, but I do want to touch a little bit about a little bit on Roma. I was surprised that he was Russian. Um, I mean, there's a lot of ethnic groups in Shanghai at this time, but for some reason, because you know Romeo and Juliet, like opposite sides of a feud, I was like, okay, she could have easily made Roma communist because there was a lot of there was a lot of like political animosities. I'm just curious as to like why did you decide to make Roma part of this Russian diaspora?
I think in that, so it's interesting because the book kind of has like two threads going on, in the sense that there's the Scarlet Gang and the White Flowers battling it out the blood feud. And then there's also the nationalists and the communists, like having their own little spiff more in the background. So because this book is like, it's a duology now. So book two is going to end the story, but it was actually originally one big manuscript before it sold to Simon and Schuster. And it was my editor at the time I was working with, who's also Chinese American. She's since moved, so I have a different editor now. But my first editor actually had the idea of splitting it into two and making the first half more of the monster and the blood feud and working together. And then the second half is more like the blood feud and the politics, sort of. So that's what's coming next year. But originally it was when it was still one big story, it was more like clear from the very get-go that politics and the gangs would soon kind of like merge together. So even at the end of book one, there are like things about the Scarlet Gang working together with the nationalists. So the way that they would eventually split is that like the communists and the White Flowers will soon kind of like they have some, like a hint towards book two is that they have something to do with each other, even if they're not like completely on the same side. So it was like, while Roma's not an outright communist, the way that like I was splitting the sides, it was definitely like a communist nationalist kind of like parallel to it. But I also think like in making him like just a Russian gang, it was almost like a rejection, not a rejection, that's not the right word either. It was, I always joke that this book is like the most anti-American book you could probably find on shelves, especially coming out like November while there's an American election going on. And the way I'm selling it is like, hey guys, you want to pick up a love story between a Chinese person and a Russian person, and the whole cast is just Chinese and Russian? Great for your American reading. But it was, it seems like the most like I was trying to get away from like any sense of a love story between like oppressor and oppressed, because I hate it when people are like, oh, this is a forbidden romance story, and actually it's just between like an oppressed group and their oppressors. So I was like, the more I can make the, you know, Juliet and Roma on completely equal ground, the more I'm actually making my point about a blood feud having like completely no rhyme or reason. And I guess I could have made the White Flowers a Chinese gang too. It probably wouldn't have made like any difference in my themes. It seemed more like the more like I can draw in from other like groups who were being like suppressed at this time of like 1920s imperialism. Like I was looking at all the places of like communist revolts, and then I was looking at like imperial Western powers. So like the Russian part of him came out from the sense that it was more like down with imperialism commentary, really.
Yeah, I mean, you can't tell a story about 1920s Shanghai without, or 1920s China without talking about the, schism between the nationalists and the Communist Party, right? Because this is when it first started like really heating up. But also, I mean, during this time, it was right after the Bolshevik Revolution. There's a lot of Russians in China as refugees. And like you said, this being set in China, as Americans, it does take some mental gymnastics to like view this as, yeah, in this world, in this time, like the Chinese are being oppressed by imperial powers in this city because of politics, but also in this country, the Russians are the minority, right? They are the immigrant minority that are also looked down upon by the majority who are like probably like the Han Chinese people, right? So,
which is so funny because sometimes people online will be like, oh yeah, the love interest is white. I'm like, technically you're right, I guess. But also like it's so like it's just so American to say that because like it's so hard to remove the Russians in China at that time from their context. Like they were not a majority like in the slightest. So like yes, that's true. You can read him as white Russian, but like damn, there was so much oppression.
yeah. And what I really enjoyed about the book is also your cast of characters, because you were able to fit in a ton of people, because this is Shanghai 1920s, right? An international city. There were so many people from different ethnicities, a lot of people from different backgrounds, and also different, like you fit in like quite a bit of like LGBTQ representation in there without making it like the focus. They were just characters that were, there's a trans character, a couple of characters that I think were gay. And they were so well written into the story that it wasn't something that like drew your attention away from the story when they appeared. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, and the fact that, like Marshall and Benedict, they're based on Mercutio and Benvolio, and they have such short stage time in the original play because the original play takes place in a span of a couple days, maybe like a week, I think. So like, what was your process like fleshing out all of the side characters and making them your own?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that like not all of my characters were like, like straight characters. Like that was like completely something I had to go in doing because I was like, this is like, first of all, it just wouldn't be reflective if they were all straight because that's just like not real life. And like going back to the fact that this is like a young adult book, like I know that there are like teenagers out there who want to see themselves like represented, and that was absolutely like something I had to do, especially given like a lot of the cast is Asian too, and there's such a lack of representation in like Asian queer characters. So that was just it. It had to happen. But like with the side characters, I think so many of them, I plotted them out as if they were main characters because I knew I wanted to know them as well as I did, like Romeo and Juliet, even though they didn't have like the same amount of stage time. So it honestly, like the process was just so similar, even like depending on like what character it was. Like I would always look to the original play first and see what the like core trait of that character is, because like in doing a retelling, like I really want to engage with like the original characters and then make something out of it rather than like just completely reinventing the wheel. So, well, Kathleen and Rosalind are new, but Marshall and Benedict were like based on Benvolio and Mercutio. So I took like what I really loved from the original character and then like I kind of expanded outward from there because it wasn't enough for me just to like take the original and kind of like make them just a bit put them in the book more, because the original characters are like suited for the stage, so they're like they tended to be more well, flat's not the right word, but like they didn't have the same amount of backstory because that wasn't like their use when they're on like a stage for a short amount of time. So when I turned it like into like a novel setting, it was more like, okay, well, how do I take what was originally a stage character and then adapt them better for the novel?
Yeah. Rira, what did you think about the Korean representation in this story?
I was really surprised, but also I thought, oh, this makes sense because there were a lot of Koreans living in Russia and they were kicked out by pretty much like the government because they were saying like they're the reason why like Russia is suffering, and it's like, oh, okay, it's like the same narrative of blame the immigrants, blame the minority group for the economy, and just like yeah, so I was just like, okay, it makes sense, but I'm also like very surprised that there's like this Korean Russian in this book. And but it just like all made sense, you know, because of Shanghai at the time and all of the ethnic groups. So I was really grateful for that bit of representation.
I love that you made him kind of like a warrior poet type of character who like kind of has this like poetic outlook on things.
Yeah, I did. That was definitely a lot of the Mercutio influence as well, because Mercutio in the play is like, he will not shut up. Like he will muse about everything. And I was like, this will be Marshall's core personality as well.
I'm glad that Tybalt was in your book, Tyler. Because I was like, oh, Tyler dies so quickly in the play, but you know, he was such a little piece of shit. So I'm glad that you kept that personality trait, and that Tyler has like a bigger role in your book, and that, you know, because of all of the political tension that's happening, it's really easy to just have like I guess just like have one main villain, but I was really glad that you had a villain within each gang, an antagonist in each gang. So it made the story more interesting. And you said that this is a duology, and because the play takes place in such a short amount of time, I just have to ask, like, was it difficult stretching out the timeline? Because so much happened between like the 1920s to like the 1940s in China. And, you know, like just the thought of stretching out a Shakespeare play in like a matter of years, it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think in that, like, I made it easier on myself because I definitely stray from the play a lot more. So it's almost, in terms of plot, I guess the duology and the play is almost like unrecognizable. Like I take a lot of like core events that will happen, but then I like refigured it so much so that like in terms of the progression of plot, it's like the original Romeo and Juliet is like almost nowhere to be seen in the duology, which made it a lot easier. But then like I had the obstacle of like the historical timeline, because like since this is like historical fantasy, even though I did add like a lot of like completely made up elements, like the Scarlet Gang, the White Flowers never existed in real life, neither did a monster, obviously. So like even though I made up so much, I also wanted to like stick to the historical component, because like, you know, if there was no reason for me to change it, I didn't really want to change it too much. So things like a lot of the like protests in Shanghai at the time, like because it was like there was such heavy political revolt against like the British and the French powers, there were like real time protests and strikes. And with that, I wanted to make sure like my timeline fit with it. So it was definitely like a lot of headaches and trying to move things around, because on a craft level, like I remember one of my earliest drafts, like my agent was like, well, I like this, but it kind of reads like a textbook in this chapter. And I was like, you know what? You are absolutely right. I did write that with a textbook open in front of me. So like there were many times where I would have to like cut a lot of like bigger protest scenes because I was trying to write it to a complete timeline and it just wasn't working because, you know, like real life doesn't match with like story arcs like very well. So there were times where I would just have to like back away from bigger like historical like pinpoints. But otherwise I tried my best to like stick to the vibe of the time more so than like actual on this day this happened, etc.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the monster, I feel like we've gone about 45 minutes without talking about one of the key story elements of this book, which is it's kind of like a supernatural thriller as well, because there is a literal monster prowling the streets of Shanghai, like causing people to go berserk. I guess what led you to add this element to the story? Because you could have told a whole story just based on the blood feud, but like you also add in this kind of horror element to it that really raises the stakes.
I think like on that, like for sure a huge part of it was me being like, I like books with high stakes and therefore I will put in something with high stakes. But it was also like the more that I brainstormed about it, it was almost like the conflict of this book isn't the conflict of book one, at least isn't the blood feud yet, because it was like I'd introduced these two gangs at war, but it wasn't like where my interest was at yet, because in terms of the character arcs, like Romeo and Juliet hadn't had enough time like grappling with each other on a personal level yet. So that's why the blood feud plays a lot more significance in the second half of the story, which then became book two. So when book one was sort of like shifting into shape, the monster, like, so to get English majory, I like believe in like death of the author, and that like what I say about like things that aren't on page doesn't really like count. But like when people ask me about it, like I have no problem being like when I wrote it, like the monster is like sort of this it's definitely like a colonialism stand-in, because it's like it's this thing that like, you know, tears through the city and like kills people like in dramatic waves. And like when you find out where it came from, like the links kind of like click into place about like who is to blame, who is the one like setting this upon the city. So it was like very much just like this like parallel story thing I was trying to go for about like, you know, at this time, who is letting things happen, who is, you know, who is causing the destruction, I guess.
I want to say, as someone who, you know, is interested in this time period, and when all was revealed, and I want to reveal because it's a huge spoiler, but it made sense to me. Like I was like, oh, that I can totally see where Chloe's head was in this monster, because it is a huge allegory to like what happened to China during this time period.
Yeah. It also freaked me out quite a lot because I'm afraid of bugs, and there are a lot of bugs in this book. And I was like, no.
Yeah. I just know I love that like so many like Asian diaspora readers have picked up on like the like parallels and links, because it's just like it's like I'm like it just feels good like to be speaking to like people who just can see what I was doing.
Yeah, we picked up what you're putting down. It felt like, you know, it felt like receiving like a secret like brainwave from you. It was pretty cool.
So are you working on anything else during this pandemic?
Oh my. I am always writing something, because I feel like I can't really like go without telling stories to myself. Like I feel like it's just how I like relax, which is kind of frightening because it's also my job. But yeah, I really love like Shakespearean retelling of all sorts. So I am like plonking away at a few other like not quite yet full projects, but they're all like in the works. And I'm like writing book 2, of course, to finish this book.
Yeah. Well, if they're all
I thought it was really I thought it was really fitting because in the book you have like this madness, you have this plague happening, and we're in the middle of COVID.
I know. It's also so funny because I mean, early on, like you learn that the epidemic is like contagious in the book, right? So someone asked me, oh, actually, this might be a spoiler. Oh, okay, I won't say it. But like, it's just funny that it's contagious, and like you're reading it now. Like when I was rereading it, and we were in a pandemic on lockdown, I was like, damn, these people should have just stayed inside.
Social distancing, you know?
Yeah. Well, if your future projects are as good as these Fine Delights, I'm looking forward to whatever you put out in the future. Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful book that's coming out on November 17th. Chloe, congratulations on a successful debut. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm sure this will do very well. I'm very excited about it. Yeah, it's such a great story, and I think it just hits on so many cylinders. Like there's action, there's suspense, and the love story ain't bad either. I was really rooting for these kids, you know, and I hope you, in the second book, you don't torture them as much as this book, but I don't know. I feel it's Romeo and Juliet, so I'm not getting my hopes up. If people want to find out more about your thoughts or follow you on social media, where can they go?
They can find me. I'm at the Chloe Gong on just about everything. Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok. I'm everywhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for stopping by and chatting with us, Chloe. Good luck on I imagine you're going to have a ton of virtual book tour stuff to do in November and October. So good luck on all that. And congratulations. Really.
Thank you. Thank you. This was great. Thank you guys so much.
And that was Chloe Gong. Her book again is These Violent Delights, available at booksellers everywhere on November 17th. Thank you again to Chloe for chatting with us, and definitely go pick up her book when it comes out. It's definitely worth reading.
If you're planning on picking up this book, just so you know, there is violence. I mean, if you haven't inferred that from the title, there's violence and there's a bit of gore in it. So just so you know before picking it up.
Yeah,
and
it's not a straight up romance adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. There's definitely
definitely not. And
some
also, this
body
is a
horror
duology. This is a duology, so it's going to end on kind of a cliffhanger. So
it's so frustrating because I want to know what happens to these kids.
See, I did not know that this was a duology until I reached the end. So I'm trying to spare you guys from the feeling that I got of, wait, that's it? I have to wait a year?
Tables will be flipped.
Yeah. So keep that in mind.
Don't forget, our November 2020 book club pick is Ignite the Stars by Maura Milan. We'll be discussing that book at the end of the month, so please read along. And that'll do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Thank you so much for listening to our interview with Chloe Gong. Thank you to Chloe for chatting with us. And thank you to Rira for doing this with me every week.
Just being here.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you next time on Books and Boba. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey, I'm Phil Yu, and you may know me from a blog called Angry Asian Man.
And I'm Jeff Yang, author, journalist, and celebrity dad.
We host a podcast called They Call Us Bruce, an unfiltered conversation about what's happening in Asian America.
Each week or so, we host a discussion about some of the most vital and interesting topics in our pop culture and our community, bringing in guests who are shaping and informing this thing called Asian America from Hollywood to D.C. and beyond.
We got media, entertainment, food, family, politics, representation.
The good, the bad, the WTF of it all.
So check us out wherever you get your podcasts or at theycallusbruce.com.
Peace.
Peace.